Welcome back to the ChiroFit podcast, your number one podcast for all things fitness, flexible nutrition, and injury rehab. I'm your host, Dr. Yannick Schultz. And today we are going to talk a little bit more about injury and rehab because I'm tired of seeing everyone making the same mistake over and over. As both a chiropractor and a coach, I obviously observe these things all the time. I see it on one side where we're helping avoid these injuries on the coaching side and we're working on good form and protecting ourselves. And then I see it on the other side where I'm treating the injuries when those who are generally not my coaching clients are coming in with these injuries because they either haven't done the preventative work or, shit happens. Excuse my language, but things happen. And so that's normal. That's life. But a lot of times it's because we are not putting ourselves in a position for success. We are not either prehabbing injuries. We're not working on our mobility. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about some of these things. There was a time, and you probably remember this, where you could go in, do a couple arm circles, maybe say a little prayer, and you'd be good to go for your workout. But the fact is you're no longer 20. You're not as limber as you used to be. Life catches up to you. And a lot of times it's because we stop focusing on these things and we're maybe less active. In your 20s, you're also generally probably more, active and out doing things, or you're not working a desk job. Wow, can't talk. Desk job. And you're probably not having all the stressors that life brings to you as we get a little bit older, whether that's, family or responsibilities, job, desk job, those types of things. So the reality is you can't really skip your warm-up, but you are. I know you are. You can't skip your warm-up. I see this all the time. Most people just walk right by where they should. They go into the machine or the bench or the exercise they're going to do, zero warm-up, and they set themselves up for failure. And this is where I think a lot of people are going wrong. So some of the common mistakes: you're ignoring your mobility. Mobility versus flexibility. Flexibility is just the tissue elasticity. It's the range that you can get through. Mobility is essentially the control of that range of motion. And this, to me, is an important distinction because, great, you can touch your toes, but you're still going to blow out your back because you can't control your pelvis. Right? So that's mobility. Again, you're skipping your warm-ups. That is a big time mistake, and we're going to talk more about that in just a minute. And I think the third would be that you're lifting heavy without the required stability that your body needs to keep things in place, to not overload tissue, what we call centration of joints. You're putting yourself in a decentrated position, and eventually that leads to an injury. So, why is the warm-up so important? And I think we've talked about this in previous episodes, but to me, the warm-up is what gets your body ready for what you're about to do. And some people might disagree, and that's okay. But I don't think you should ever jump right under a bar, because ideally, I want to get the nervous system ready to accept what's going to happen. Both the tissues, the element of stability, keeping things within control. You want to warm everything up. So for that reason, that it's called a warm-up is exactly that, is that you're prepping your body, is you're making sure that you're, avoiding some of the things that may happen if you don't. So what is the framework in which I would set up a, strength training warm-up, we'll say? So to me, the prep work is the most important. And we're looking generally at blood flow, which could be a simple, warm up. That could be light cardio. It could be walking, but it can also be getting the tissues warm, doing some light exercises or some things that are going to pump some blood into the tissues. I think that helps with the kind of the metabolic aspect of things, where it helps bring in and flush out some of the the lymphatics, gets the tissues just warm and ready. And so the joints are a little more, willing to accept what you're going to take on. Stability, another big element here, is getting everything nice and stable. We think of, again, joint centration. Joint should sit ideally in its socket. With tightness from the day, with lack of stability, we start to kind of fall into these positions. And this is oftentimes where we see like a shoulder impingement. Well, you're overloading yourself or you're not stable. And so warming up and getting yourself more stable could help prevent this. One warm up isn't going to solve everything, but it can be one of the reasons that we prevent these things, especially if we do them over time. The other is mobility, right? So working on controlling the joint through ranges of motion. So taking those joints through different ranges, taking your thoracic spine through ranges, whether that's rotation. And again, this is where kind of auditing where you're at. Like, what feels tight today? Do I need to foam roll a little bit more? Maybe. I'm going to say no. But do I need to work on the tissues a little bit more? Am I feeling tight? Is my hip not rotating as well on one side or the other? Does my wrist feel stiff? Do I need to release some of those tissues? What do I need to do in this audit to figure out, okay, this is all part of the prep work, is like what needs to be worked on to feel better that day? And maybe you focus in on certain areas. So mobility, stability, blood flow are going to be some of the more important. And then this nervous system connection is all part of the prep work. So making sure that your nervous system is ready to fire, to contract those muscles. I had this conversation with a client. Little sip. I had this conversation with a client the other day in clinic who asked about an exercise that I gave him. We were working on internal rotation of his hip. And he said, I can actually feel my glute more now. He's like, is that weird? I said, it's not weird. It's what it's supposed to do. So when you lack rotation or you lack mobility, range of motion of a joint, if that joint feels restricted, if the joint feels unsafe, your body will downregulate contractions, meaning it won't let you use that area to its fullest because it's trying to protect you from doing something that might make it worse. Right? Again, picture that joint again. We're here. We're supposed to be stable like this, but we're stuck in the joint kind of here. We don't have that range. We're restricted. We're really tight in the tissues, right? So is it going to let you fully contract your glute so that you can get the maximal movement? No, because then that sees it as danger. It sees impingement. It sees the possibility of what could happen. So it's going to stop you from making it worse. But if you have better freedom in the joint, more stability around that joint, it feels safe, right? We want to picture this kind of this ball that floats perfectly in this kind of container of tissues. That doesn't sound right, but you get the point. If that's the case, then the muscles can contract harder and they can work harder. So realistically, if you lack mobility, you will lack the ability to create more muscle. So this is another PSA or reason for you to actually go out and focus on your mobility because it will actually help you train better. It'll help you contract more. If you're a sprinter, it's going to allow you to blast out of that faster because you have access to more. So mobility and stability to me are arguably the most important for many, many reasons. In this framework, we have our prep, we have our training, right? Which again, I think exercise selection and structure to our workouts is very important. You probably don't want your heaviest compound movement right away. Yes, you probably don't want to leave it to the end where you're most exhausted either. And there's arguments to be made for one or the other. But I think that you would generally want some movements that are going to help kind of warm up the tissues or warm up the things that you're going to do. I'm going to use a leg day that I utilize, for example. My two kind of primary movements that I start with beyond the prepping and the warm up is a hip abduction machine as well as a seated leg curl. Why? Seated hip abduction. Not only am I working the adductors, adduction in. Not only am I working the adductors, but I'm also opening up the hips. If you've sat in that machine, you know that it really opens things up and then you squeeze together. So it also helps distract and open up the hips. So for me, I'm like, I want to get those hips as open as I can, knowing my hips are a little stiffer before I get under any barbell or anything like that. So I do that and it warms up those muscles. It gets the adductors firing, which is not something that we typically work a ton of. And again, this is aside from my stability, prep work, all those things. And then a seated leg curl. What is a seated leg curl doing? Well, it's creating flexion. You are bending your knee. So you're bringing the knee in and you're creating flexion. What do you do in a squat? You bring your body down, which creates knee flexion. So, although you're not warming up the quad specifically in this one, which is, we'll say, one of the more primary movers in a squat, beyond the glutes and everything else, and yes, you're addressing, addressing the hamstrings, which again, a good thing to warm up, create a little more stability probably around the pelvis, get those tissues warm. Hamstrings are generally weaker muscles. Most people are quad dominant, so they're generally weaker muscles. So not only do you get to warm up the quads or the hamstrings, excuse me, but you're also working on knee flexion, which is then going to make it easier when you go into a squat to get into those areas where the joint feels warm. It feels good because it's already gone through that motion. So even in my warm-ups, I like to do movements that are going to mimic the main thing that I want to do. If you want to do heavy squats, heavy deadlifts, right? A deadlift is a lot of both hip flexion and hip extension. So I'm going to probably want to include something in my warm-up that has that. Maybe that's a glute bridge. Maybe that's some single leg hip hinging, some RDL marching, something that is including both of those things, right? So maybe it's a hip extension, right? A cable kickback, something that's going to warm up the joint in the direction of the thing that I want it to do, especially when we're doing it at a more compound exercise, a heavier exercise. The third piece to our framework is going to be the recovery. Now, I'm not a huge fan of stretching right after. I kind of think that's not necessary. I think it's a little bit of BS, stretching right after the exercise. I think your recovery can be other things. I think that your recovery can be proper supplementation, proper sleep, hydration, making sure you're getting enough protein. I think stretching can be done later in the evening when you're hanging out. I also think if you get a really good warm up, that you don't necessarily have to have a super intense cool down. I'm not saying don't stretch, but I'm saying I don't think immediately after you work out, I got to get to the mat to do this like 30-minute cool down. No. I also think if you're doing cardio, you're doing blood flow work, you're doing walking and getting steps, you're also going to help things get a little less sore. You're going to help with the metabolites and getting everything flushed through the system. Or again, the lymphatics, everything like that. So again, this is where the blood flow kind of comes in. I think you could argue that your warm up, your prep work can also be part of your recovery at some point throughout the day, later in the day as well. So yes, you can do some stretching. I just don't think it has to be immediately after. And I think your recovery is not just, I did this, I did a couple minutes of stretching after my workout, but then I didn't do anything else that was productive for the rest of the day, right? It doesn't matter how much stretching you do if you're also not giving yourself the right nutrition, the hydration, everything that your body needs, good sleep. That is going to completely destroy your recovery. And it doesn't matter that you did, whatever yoga stretches. And then, of course, repeat, rinse and repeat. All right. So we want consistency in what we're doing. We want to have kind of repeatable things. This is why for me, when I think of my warm-ups, I have 4 or 5 exercises that I can run through in 5 to 10 minutes. You do not need 45 minutes on the foam roller. I don't care how old you are, how young you are. You do not need 45 minutes on the foam roller or 45-minute warm-up. I think you can realistically maybe do a little bit of some sort of cardiovascular for a couple minutes just to get the heart rate up, get the blood flow going, jump into some stretching, some movements, get dynamic movements, get everything going. Have the same kind of exercises that you can go to. Okay, it's shoulder day. I'm doing these for my shoulder. Okay, it's lower body, it's leg day. I've got these ones, right? And you can pick like 3 or 4 that hit different things, right? I've got maybe it's some sort of lunging movement where you're getting hip flexors, you're getting knee, you're getting ankle, right? Like a knees over toes type of thing. You're getting something like a 90-90 that hits the glutes, that hits the hip movement. And then you're doing some activation drills, right? So that way you can work on, again, your blood flow, your mobility, your stability, and your nervous system, and put all those things together. And then you've got, okay, this day I do this day I do this, and you can kind of just quickly, and you can always add or subtract things, but then it's very quick and easy. In 5-10 minutes, you're ready to go. So prep, train, recover, and repeat. Those are kind of the biggest things when it comes to injury and injury prevention. So you can train hard and you can stay pain-free, but longevity is going to beat ego every time. I mean, there's a reason LeBron James regarded as one of the greatest players ever, and it's not just because he is the greatest player ever. It's also because he's been able to do it for so long at such a long capacity. He's in his 40s now. And so for him to still be doing it at this level, right? And he is a freak of nature. Not everyone we can't compare ourselves to LeBron James. But not only is he talented, but he's outlasting everyone. He's been in the league for so long. And nobody at his age, or as I think he's on 25 years now in the league, nobody has done it for this long at this level. And so again, you could have been an absolutely amazing player for 2-3 years, but then you puttered out. No one's going to remember your name. You've got guys who came in and got injured. You know, your Brandon Roys, we all know the major guys who had potential, whether it's NBA, NHL, NFL, guys who could have gone the distance. You know, even like a Derrick Rose, for example. I'm using basketball as the example, but you know, he had potential to be one of the greatest point guards of all time, and he still was a fantastic point guard. But again, things did not, and some of that's freak accidents, some of that's just potentially genetics, but let's use it in the context of our fitness. The more you prevent these injuries, you stay on top of them, you can still chase intensity and mastery without really putting yourself in a position where you're having to fall on and off every time. All right. Hopefully you found this episode helpful. Stay tuned for our next episode. Thanks for joining in.